Okay, everybody, I am once again so excited to have Trey Lawrence back on the show with us. He is from General Counsel at the AAO and the creator of the Orthattorney. So, Trey, thank you so much for being back on the show with us.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
So I know on our last episode a while back, we really got into the weeds about some legal issues and whatnot. And this time I thought it would be really fun to have you on to talk a little bit more about, just tell us a little bit more about how you started the Orthattorney, but also I thought we would kind of focus this episode on a little bit more social media and things that we may need to be paying attention to from a social media legal standpoint. Sound good to you?
Oh, absolutely.
All right.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit, in case somebody missed the last podcast, just give us a little bit of history on yourself, what you're doing with the AAO, and then about your channel on all of the social groups out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am General Counsel for the American Association of Orthodontists. So that means that I head our legal and advocacy teams. The legal stuff we're going to talk about plenty today, and then the advocacy is all of the lobbying type work that we do on behalf of members and patients with the federal and state governments. And so I've been with the AAO for about 4.5 years. Before that, I came from 18 plus years at a big law firm based out of here in St. Louis, doing mainly litigation related things. So I was in the courtroom. I really feel like that's a perspective that I'm able to bring to our orthodontists in the dental community now, is having been in the courtroom and see the way that these issues and negligence and malpractice and things like that play out. So that, with that being my background, one of the things that the AAO offers certainly for our members is we have lots of legal resources of different kinds, and that's all the way from sample contracts and informed consents and lots of legal forms and articles about legal topics and those kind of things. But one of the things that I've struggled with over the last few years, I've got my two oldest kids are both in college, so I get to see their demographic, group up close, but recognizing it's not just limited to college kids. Yeah. There's just been a fundamental change in the way that our society consumes information. Mm-hmm. And so, and I, even here at the AAO, when we look at things like, email communications and things that we as an association have relied on for years to communicate with our members, and, open rates go down on emails and all of those are things that every association in the world struggles with. And so especially over the past year or so, as I've looked at all the resources, all the legal information that we had for members, but what are the ways, who's communicating effectively with people? Obviously, social media is the big one. So then that sets me into motion thinking about, well, how do you translate legal information to a social media context, and especially recognizing that, it's not, the big thing on social media is not 45-minute or 60-minute YouTube videos. It's 7-second Instagram reels, and 10-second TikToks, which do not really inherently lend themselves very well to legal issues. So really struggled with that, but I really spent the last 6 months before I launched the Orthattorney looking at, what can we communicate through those channels, and then how do we do that? And so then back at about the beginning of October, we launched the Orthattorney. Instagram is kind of my home base, and then I also reshare a lot of my content on YouTube and TikTok. But really trying to take all of that legal information, make it as accessible as possible, so you can use something like a 7-second reel or a 10-second TikTok to at least raise a thought with somebody. Hey, here's an issue maybe you didn't think about before. Go down and read the caption and click through to this post, those kind of things, and then drill down if they want to. So that was really the process behind it.
Yeah.
Now, I was going to say, I say all of that before I started this whole thing. I don't think I had ever posted a selfie anywhere on the internet in my life, much less even knew what a reel was, or how to record a reel or anything like that. So in addition to that whole process of how do you convert legal information to that format, I had to do a whole lot of just watching YouTube videos on how to make a reel. But I say all of that because if there's practices out there that you need to be in social media, but have been reluctant, or like, I don't want to see myself on camera, I don't know how to do any of that. Please hear me. I was in that same category on all of that. I hated selfies. I hated seeing myself on camera. I knew nothing about it. If I can do it, you can do it. I promise you.
And I'm going to echo that too. And especially working with so many of my startup docs and whatnot, it's not comfortable for most people to put yourself out there and to be in front of a camera and whether it's giving information like you are legally or giving information to potential patients out there about bites and why they should come to your practice versus another. But I'm going to echo what you just said. You can do it. There's so many tools out there to DIY it, to figure it out. You just have to, it's really just about the time, putting the time in to, and not being, you don't start perfect.
Oh, no. The best advice I got from anybody was just start.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if you don't feel like you're up to, the technical capability or the quality capability. You will look back. Everybody's told me this. You will look back on the first step you did and think it's awful. And it doesn't matter how long you wait till you get started, you're going to think that. So just get started.
Yeah. So that just kind of leads me into, because I think that's like a perfect segue. So we know nowadays more than ever, the way practices are getting patients, a majority is out there socially. I mean, I've been in the industry for a long time. I can tell you, I still remember when we would run ads in the yellow pages. Yes, I'm that old, number one, but number two, that was the way that was the way patients found out about this. It wasn't through looking us up online. It wasn't through following our TikTok or our Instagram or our Facebook feeds. But it is now. And so I would love to get your perspective from the legal side of it on maybe some tips for doctors or team members that are out there in maybe things that they post. And I'm going to have some questions for you on this. Maybe what's the right or the legal way to do things, and maybe what isn't. And I know on our last episode, we kind of got into reviews and, kind of best practices. So if somebody didn't hear that one, definitely go back and listen to that episode. But let's talk more about just what they're physically putting into their feeds and maybe do's and don'ts or legal versus maybe you're in a gray area.
Yeah, no. And the challenge there is that in a sense, as a practice, you're looking at other businesses in other industries and what they're putting out on social media. And you want to model what's effective, but dental practices, medical practices in general, dental practices and orthodontic practices specifically are held to a higher standard of what you can and can't say in any kind of advertising. And that definitely includes social media. So I've got a list of 8 things that I always tell practices that you can't say in social media marketing. I'm make sure I'm looking at my notes here so I don't miss any of them, but I'll just quickly go through the 8. So number 1 is factually inaccurate information. So I say that, and probably first reaction is, well, duh. Of course, what you say in advertising has to be accurate, but the challenge is that for dental practices, I mean, nearly every dental board in the country have rules specifically. So basically, dental boards hold dental practices to a higher standard of truthfulness than other businesses are held to. So you absolutely need to make sure that anything you say online, you can verify factually. So then what that leads into, first of all, a big one, creating unjustified expectations. You can't say anything in your advertising that promises things that you aren't 100% sure you can deliver. So one area I see a big problem with this is in patient testimonials. If you're using patient testimonials, make sure that your patients are not promising things in those testimonials, like, oh, my life was changed. Make sure it's clear. You can say things like, oh, I feel so much better about myself. I have so much more self-confidence, that kind of thing, if that's true for that patient. But you got to be careful about what patients say. They're not creating a sense of unjustified expectations. Another big one, when you go back to making sure that everything you say is factually verifiable, is comparative claims. So either comparing yourself to other practices or comparing your treatment methods your materials that you use, your appliances, all those kind of things, the things that other people use. So things, when you start saying that you're better than somebody else, you've got the most skilled, doctor, the most intelligent doctor, or doctor is the best orthodontist. Well, how are you going to verify with factual information that your orthodontist is the best orthodontist in town,
Sure.
or something like that? So comparative claims in particular are a big problem area that you need to make sure that anything that you say is factually verifiable. Now, it may be true. I mean, maybe you can accurately say that your doctor has more years of experience than any doctor in town. Well, that's something that's factually verifiable. So you could make that comparative claim, but the best, those kind of things, that's going to be more of a challenge. Besides that, so painless or pain-free, every dental board in the country has got a rule that says you cannot advertise that your treatment is painless or pain-free. I hope not anybody's doing that, and it's not as much of an issue. Pain is not as much of a fear factor for orthodontists as it is other types of dental practice, but I definitely want to flag that because dental boards specifically single that one out. Advertising as a specialist, every dental board in the country has rules that say if you're going to advertise as an orthodontic specialist or as another kind of dental specialist, you have to meet certain criteria. And that's going to come down to, did you receive an education in that specialty from a CODA approved institution? Now, the good thing is, I think most of the listeners of this podcast are orthodontists who did get that kind of an education, so you can advertise as specialist. But, if you just make sure that you're not advertising as a specialist in an area that you didn't go to a CODA approved educational program in that dental specialty. And then finally, unreasonably preying on fears. That's another one that dental boards will single out. There's a classic example of a dentist's office back in the 40s or 30s that was infamously using pictures of people whose teeth had fallen out, try to scare people and go into the dentist. That the court said that was unreasonably preying on fears, so you can't do that. And then finally, make sure, I think sometimes practices try to get cute and say things through patients, like I said a minute ago, that they can't say themselves. Make sure that you're not doing that. Make sure that anything your patients are saying about you meets the same criteria that anything that you'd say about your own practice.
Yeah, that's great. I have as you were kind of going through that, I have some questions about, and I've seen kind of this pop up in some of the different groups and discussions. Besides what you can say, are there maybe no-goes or be really cautious about what you can post in pictures? So maybe having to do with before and after pictures, or certain types of bites that is there anything there that, and again, I think things evolve that weren't something that could be something, but I've definitely seen some chatter out there about, can you post before and afters? Can you actually post to patients pictures without their consent, things like that? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So I think this is one of those areas that HIPAA has really changed the landscape, and some things that were probably okay for posting in pictures, 15 or 20 years ago, or come under a little more scrutiny now. So most people know generally that if you're going to use a patient's picture online, that you've got to get a release from the patient or the parent if it's a minor. So it's devil's definitely in the details here. So the specific applications of that, I think, are where practices get into problems. So number one is the before and after pictures of just teeth that you mentioned, or if the faces are blacked out. That's when I think it's out there. A lot of people just assume, oh, well, if I'm only showing the teeth, I'm not showing the full face, then that's not identifying the patient, and I don't need a release for that. The law is starting to evolve in that area. I'm aware of at least one state that in a HIPAA case said that the teeth are so personally identifying that even if you show just the teeth, that is disclosing somebody's personal health information. And so that's only one state. That's not every state in the country yet. But given the trend of HIPAA and, the way that courts have interpreted HIPAA, I would expect other courts are going to follow that. To me, it's a little bit of aggravation in getting a release, even if you just want to use the teeth. And if the patient's reluctant, for full face, then just put in the release. We're just going to show your teeth and get that on the release. But it's, a risk-benefit analysis. It's not that difficult to get a release from a patient or a parent. I think the law is going to transition to even pictures of just the teeth require release, I think the best practice is to go ahead and get into the habit of
Yeah.
doing that. So that's one of the details that I see problems with. And then the other detail I see problems with is when people know that they need to get authorization for the patient, but thinking that verbal authorization is enough. That's one I think that HHS and the Department of Justice are going to really crack down on and make sure that you've got a written signed release from the patient, that the verbal release, right before you snap their picture, you say, hey, you mind if we post this? And they say, sure. And then you take the picture. I think Department of Justice and HHS are really going to crack down on that.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me to our, and we talked a little bit about this with the informed consent, but on the informed consent where it says, can we show your records? Does that translate? Because I know in the past that was more like, my understanding was, more doctors in study groups and they're, maybe doing this, that, or the other, where now it's, I don't know necessarily that patients would maybe translate show your records in a Facebook doctors group where they're discussing treatment, but it's an open forum or this, that, or the other. Is there some gray area there? Are you saying we should probably have another consent form, maybe even different than the social media consent form if we were showing patient records that way? Or am I getting too much in the weeds here with that?
You just want to make sure that whatever consent that you get from a patient includes that the scope of it includes what you're going to use the image for. And so you need to, and I know the temptation would be, oh, well, then I'm just going to get a release from every patient that just says I can use this basically for anything. But I think the challenge there is going to be that, again, as courts get stricter and stricter about HIPAA, they're going to want proof that the patient knowingly consented to the use of the image in the way that you're actually using it. So I think some just blanket, authorization like that is probably going to be a challenge. So, and the other thing related to that is I think I've heard some practices that ask, well, can't we just stick that in the patient contract? We'll just put some boilerplate provision in the patient contract. I think that's another one that the courts are going to say that is not knowing consent by the patient to use in a specific manner. I would say make it a separate release and then make sure that the release covers the scope specifically of what you're going to use the picture for.
Okay. So let's talk. I know you're using the word release, and I can kind of think of different ways that a release form. Can you expand on what you think a good release form would look like for an office, whether it's for social media or maybe there's a couple different ones out there? And I think we are talking different than the informed consent that talks about consent of release of records as well. Or use of records.
Yeah, the use of records in the informed consent is typically more for providing the permission to provide records to other people who are going to be involved in the treatment process. So the release is going to be for using it outside of that context. And HIPAA allows that too. HIPAA allows for disclosure of personal health information to somebody else that's directly involved in the treatment. But if you're talking about something like, either your social media marketing or a Facebook group where you're just asking other people's opinion, but they're not a doctor of record for that patient, then that is not directly involved in the treatment of the patient. And so that's where you need to have a separate authorization from the patient. So, there's no magic language to that. It's just, it needs to be that the person is authorized to give the authorization. So it's the parent, if it's a minor, and then where you really need to be specific is just make sure that it covers the scope of what you're going to use it for.
Great. And the release that would be used for social media, if a patient says, sure, you can use my pictures, can then transcend to the doctor's social feeds, if however they want to, if they're going to use before and afters, they're going to make a video, whatever. But it could also transcend into if they were in a study group with other doctors and they're just talking about their case or whatever. There doesn't have to be something separate there as long as they've got that social media release.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think where the problem comes in is if let's say a parent signs a release and they think that you're talking about, posting the kid's picture in the practice or something like that. And they get uncomfortable when they recognize that it's going to be blasted out to, hundreds or thousands of people on social media. But if your release specifically includes social media, then it doesn't matter if it's your practice website for the general public or a study group. I think both of those would be covered by the social media language.
Great, great. And is there resources? I'm sorry, I should know this. Is there resources on the AAO where you've got these release forms, kind of form letters, or do you give any suggestions to doctors if they were making their own on what should be on them?
Yeah, no, we actually do have a template release, and we've updated that within the last year or two, very
Oh, great.
cognizant of, the social media usage, and make sure that any potential social media usage is covered by that. So that's definitely a you know, and there are places in that too. If you're going to have some unusual use that's not covered by the release, you can note that as well. But that template is going to be a really good starting point for
Okay.
99% of cases.
Yeah, that's great. So how about anything legal that docs or practices? I know we just went through release forms and whatnot, but anything that legally we should be aware of on, I don't know, either social site to social site or just in general, if we're going to be out there, any any places that we should be really paying attention to beyond what we just talked about?
Yeah, if we talk about step away from social media specifically for a second, I'm going to talk about just your practice website in general. One of the
That's a
areas that
good
I've seen a lot of activity over the last 6 months or so has been HHS and the Department of Justice looking and making sure that practice websites are HIPAA compliant. And so I am not a technical expert. I know just enough to be dangerous in this area, but there are a lot of and especially the real problem is, I think, when, let's rewind like 15 years ago when practices first started having websites. It would be more for informational purposes.
hmm
It just would have biographical information about the doctor or that kind of thing. Well, you didn't have to worry about HIPAA there because there wasn't a transaction of patient information. But now practice websites have become much more sophisticated because now you can schedule appointments. You can, maybe there's a live chat function. Patients can fill out paperwork on the website. So there is a transmission of personal health information about the patient through the website. And that's where what I think has caused the government to start to really look at, make sure that those websites are HIPAA compliant. So that's going to require a bunch of different things. Again, this is another area. If you're really concerned about this, I'd advise talking to a consultant that's an expert in this area or a lawyer that's an expert in this area. But this is one of the things I'm putting out a lot on the Orthattorney
Yes.
over the last few weeks, and will be for the next few weeks because it's been such a hotbed of activity. It's just at least raising the issues of the things that you need to be aware about.
Yeah, that's great. And I think again, we can get so focused or tunnel vision on one thing. Oh, we're talking about the social media sites and totally forget that there's this whole other component that is still attached to us, our website, and we're not intentionally, but could be unintentionally, maybe not, going through and checking all the boxes and making sure that we're in compliance and staying safe within our practices. And I would almost bet probably similar to what we talked about on the previous podcast, where we had just talked about, making a checklist of things that you could have legal things that you need to pay attention to. I would think socially too, we probably need to be doing this. Are we paying attention to, when we update things on our website or add new gadgets or, this, that, or the other? Are we being mindful of what's happening there?
Yeah, definitely. Because I'll give you just one example, encryption. So I think most practices know, like your email server, if you're transmitting personal health information, the emails have to be encrypted. But if you're transmitting personal health information through your website, that's subject to the same encryption requirements as your email server. Well, let's say you're using a vendor, some kind of a vendor for your website that maybe doesn't have healthcare experience specifically. They don't have to worry about encryption for the transmission of data, for let's say an auto body shop website,
Sure.
that kind
Yeah.
of thing. So they may not be thinking that all of the portals where the patient information passes through need to be encrypted. That's the kind of thing. And so the checklist that you're talking about, and again, there are companies that specialize in the tech of that and can give you those kind of checklists that you need to check all those boxes off. But that encryption of data is an easy one. That's kind of an example of that.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about just your videos out there because, and you know, and I really do. I enjoy seeing them. I enjoy just seeing that you're breaching that space where you're taking kind of an uncomfortable subject sometimes, bringing lightheartedness to it, but yet really getting your point across. Tell me a little bit about, how do you come up with your content? Are you just kind of listening to what's out there? I mean, like how are you deciding, oh, this is good information that I think docs need to be hearing as you're pulling together your show?
Yeah. So, I haven't been at the AO for 4.5 years and talking regularly with members, that's gives a really good baseline set of the kind of issues and the most common legal questions that members have. And one of the things that we do, as part of the legal resources at the AO, we have a resident legal course that we go and do for the resident programs. And so that's a 3 or 4 hour, again, it's a really good set of the most common issues that practices face in the legal world. So we definitely rely on that and what we hear from members. The other thing that we in the legal department here at the AO do is we have, number of news sources that we scan all the time for breaking news in the legal world. I've got an outside law firm that practices in healthcare. They do it. It's kind of a safety net for us too. And that's what, like when I mentioned HHS really cracking down on HIPAA compliance of websites, that's one of the things that we picked up through that scanning of what's going on the legal development side, and seeing a lot of activity out of HHS and the Department of Justice recently in that area. So we're scanning all of that too. I think that's more the category of things that practices are not yet thinking about. We want to make sure that they're aware of as well.
Yeah, that's great. So as we, kind of come to the end here, I'm curious to know, is there anything that you think the audience should know about that we didn't cover or I didn't ask when it comes to social media, legal aspects out there?
I think probably, my big takeaway on all of this is that this is definitely one of those areas that you can be, of all the things you know about, you can be 100% in compliance with them, but there are some things that you're just not aware of. And that's why it's important to, whether it's through the Orthattorney or talking to your own practice attorney or getting a newsletter from a HIPAA compliance firm, all of those guys, just make sure that you have a constant flow of new ideas and new things so that you can see some things and say, oh my gosh, I never even thought about, needing to make sure that we do that. I think that's so important because you can manage really well the things you know about, but the law, the danger is in the things that you don't know about yet. You need to make sure that you've got an inflow of information that raises your awareness about things you didn't already know about.
Yeah, that's great. So if people want to find out more about following you, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you at? If they need to get a hold of the AO, what best way to get a hold of the legal department there?
Yeah, absolutely. On the AAO side, if you just go to the AAO website, the main phone number there, if you call that number up and ask to be transferred to the legal department, you'll talk to Kathy, our department administrator, or one of the attorneys, and we're happy to talk about any of the kinds of things that we talked about today. Definitely use the member website as well. Like I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of really good resources there. And then on the Orthattorney side, if you go, Instagram's kind of my main landing place. It's the Orthattorney. Find me and follow me there. And if the stuff that we've talked about today or the last time that I was with you is of interest to people, definitely follow me on the Orthattorney, because that's exactly what I post about nearly every day.
Yeah, that's great. Well, again, thank you so much, Trey, for being on the show, and just such good information. I hope we'll get to do this again.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, from before, I like to finish up with a speed round. It hasn't changed. I won't ask you the same questions, though.
Okay.
So, coffee or tea?
Okay. So let me clarify. When we say tea, are we talking, does it have to be hot, or can we include ice too?
It can be either.
Okay, then I'm including ice, because everybody teases me I need to grow up and learn to drink coffee, but I am not a coffee fan. I'm not a hot drink fan at all, which is why I asked about that, because I'm not a big fan of hot tea either. But if you're talking my Arkansas grandma's sweet tea, iced tea, I'm all in on that.
That's great. Do you have a favorite book?
You know, I'm probably guilty of not reading as much just for fun or
Mhm.
personal, edification as I should. So much of what I read now, gets locked into the kind of things we've been talking about. So I have to look a little further back, but probably the most impactful book that I ever read when I did a master's degree at Harvard, and I had Dr. Cornell West, who's an amazing scholar, was in the Matrix too, which is incredible to have a professor at Harvard Law School who was in the Matrix.
That
But
is
he
pretty cool.
he had a really well-known book called Race Matters. It just blew my mind about opening my eyes to not just thinking through about racial issues specifically and kind of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, but just making that a foundational philosophy of life, of getting out of your own head and looking through other people's eyes. Is just an amazing wake-up call there.
Oh, that's great. I will put that on. I keep a running list that I'm always looking for new books. So I'll definitely add that one. How about favorite outdoor activity?
I mean, really anything outdoors, I'm down for. But if I'm going to pick one out, it's got to be fishing.
I love it. And if I remember right, on a lake, just out there, you and the fish, zen time.
Absolutely. I mean, I will do any kind of fishing. I've done everything from deep sea fishing in Aruba to mountain stream fly fishing, but my preferred is bass boat alone, going 90 to nothing, all by myself, just in the zen
That's
zone,
great.
focused
That's
in.
great. We all need something like that just for us. If
Absolutely.
you could be remembered for one thing, what would that be?
More than anything, I think I would like to be known for a legacy of just empowering people to be better versions of themselves. I just
Love
think
that.
I I mean, to me, life ultimately comes down, it's just a construction process. You're trying to build yourself up and build
Mhm.
others up. And
Yeah.
I want everybody to come away from their interaction with me thinking I'm a better person because I knew that guy.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. And then final one, if you had a best piece of advice that was ever given to you.
Whew, that's a tough one because I've gotten some really good stuff along the way. I had a really wise friend tell me that the final words in the last breath of every dying organization are, "We've never done that before."
That's a good one.
Constantly pushing yourself to stop thinking about, don't let the fact that we've never done something before be an impediment to doing it if we need
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Trey, again, thank you so much for being on Hey Docs. This was wonderful. I know our audience got a lot out of it, and I look forward to having you on the show again sometime.
Absolutely.
All
Look
right.
forward to
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you. Yep.